Hello and welcome to AXSChat. This is a really special chat because we're welcoming Devon to AXSChat today. Joe is one of the co-founders of GAAD, which is, of course, Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And that happens this week. It's this Thursday, so we're bang on time. So thank you very much for joining us, Joe. I'd love to hear a bit about the backstory of Gad, because it's something that we've been engaging in for the last few years, and we've got big plans this year too.
Great. Thanks. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Let's see, the backstory. Well, I guess it all started, I was watching a video. It was back in 2007. I was just a web developer doing freelance work, and I was pretty much keeping in touch with the latest technology and thought that I knew most of the stuff going on in web development. And then I don't even know how or who, but somehow I saw this video from Victor Tsaran, who was then a programmer at Yahoo. And then he started to show what it was like to surf the Yahoo website with a screen reader, which I had never heard of. And I was shocked and blown away, and saddened too that I felt like if I didn't know anything about this, that probably nobody else did. And so I read up about it, learned a little bit about it, and then kind of filed it in the back of my mind. Then I moved to Los Angeles, and around 2011, I was at my dad's house, and he was getting older, and he started having trouble with his sight and with his hearing, and he had gotten fished, and he was trying to do some banking. And at that age, even going to the bank is difficult because he couldn't drive anymore. It would take him a full day to get to the bank. So he gets an email from the bank saying that he has to fill out some form, and he tried to do it, but I had arranged his computer to have special colors so that he could see the site, but it was not accessible at all. And so even when I went over, I couldn't read the email, and I got very upset because something like banking is a required thing, and you can take somebody that is otherwise dependent on folks and make the website accessible. All of a sudden, they can do banking and they don't have to deal with the outside world. And it was just so many little details that came up together. So even when you make a phone call, if you can't hear well, the TTY didn't work well either. So he couldn't even call up Citibank. He literally had to go in person. So I got pretty upset, or worked up, as Jennison would say. And I wrote this blog post on MySQL Talk, which has received tens and tens of visitors throughout its life, a really tiny little blog. And I said, why don't we create this Global Accessibility Awareness Day? And if you go to the original blog post, you can see Jennison there. I tweeted the blog post. Jennison in Toronto at the time saw it, and he's like, this is a great idea. You got to make it happen. Little did we know what would happen. Oh my goodness. So we had a few months. We were both very busy. We made it happen May 9th, 2012, and then it just blew up from there.
And yeah, I think the first time I went to an event at Google in London, and we've been running them ourselves for the last 3 years. So it's and we're upping the ante every year. So I've been working in accessibility for quite some time, and on Twitter also for quite some time. So we've seen all of the activity, and we see it growing each year. It really has snowballed.
Yeah.
I don't know how you hold down another job now.
Yeah, no kidding. It's insane.
So do you take time off around Gad to take out time to be able to deal with the activities? Yeah.
Yeah, I have no choice. Yeah, I take off the full week, and it's been a little rough because I've been really busy at work, and have a couple of talks to give. So this past weekend, finally, I think I got the first draft of the first one last night at midnight. I finished. So hopefully I'll make it in time for Thursday.
So where are you speaking?
I'm speaking at Expedia as well as Airbnb.
Oh, fantastic. And they're quite different audiences, I would have thought.
Yeah, so they're both kind of related to travel. So the worst picture, you know, they might be pretty similar. We'll see how the time works out.
So Joe, where do you work during, you know, when you're not doing GAD?
Well, I live in Los Angeles, and so I was a freelance developer, and then I started working in 2008 at AmericanIdol.com. Did a lot of work for Fox, and then started a digital agency, and we're doing a lot of the similar work, but now, you know, through an agency. So doing lots of fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've also experienced some of the as my parents aged and my parents-in-laws, my in-laws also aged. We walked some of those similar paths, and I'm actually walking some of those paths. Excuse me, with my husband right now, because as we know, as we age, more of us acquire. Accessibility helps all of us. So I think just the power of the response to GAD shows how much it was needed. So kudos to you and Jennison for, you know, doing this. And it's really exciting to watch brands like Atos really step up their game and say, all right, this is what we're doing. This is, you know, how everybody can be involved. I know Barclays is talking about what they're doing. Dropbox is writing articles. So and you probably know a lot more. What are there some events that you want to talk about, just briefly mention on the show today?
A good question. I kind of counted before coming on board, and there were about 40 events. There's some big stuff coming, but I can't really talk about it yet. So yeah, I'm excited about a couple of things, but I guess the biggest one for me is that Sir Tim Berners-Lee is keynoting or co-keynoting along with Jennison in where was it?
Copenhagen.
Again? Copenhagen, yeah. And that blew me away because as a web developer, you know, Tim Berners-Lee is an inspiration, and he's a very busy fellow. And you know, for him to take the time out to notice that this exists, I mean, I've been blown away many times by who even heard about this, because I wrote the blog post. I always thought that it was a good idea, and it would take an awful lot of work to make people notice and for folks to go behind it. But I knew developers, they do care. If you get them to understand it, they care. But it's taken off by itself, and who would have thought, you know, in this particular field, who would have thought, you know, we get last year I think we had 3 tweets a minute. We've had a Twitter global reach, I think they called it, of 25 million people, 50 million views, something along those lines. This was a few years ago. I mean, would you have expected those kind of numbers? And it's just Twitter.
Right. I know Twitter's amazing. The AXSChat is the second largest tweet chat in the world, and we're amazed. Really? Accessibility and disability inclusion. So we've all been blown away by that as well. Obviously we're having a major tipping point. We see that with GAD, we see that with AXSChat, we see it with others. One thing we'd like to do is definitely take the original blog post that started this Access website, so that people that are curious about it can go out and, because I'm sure it's still very relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can send you the link as well as the tweet that that Jennison saw. I did manage to dig it up.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Jennison. I remember meeting Jennison years ago at a conference that IBM was holding, and I was so impressed with his brilliance, and he's done so much since then. So we have a really good, you know, and also make one more note and then pass it to Antonio or Neil. But I was a former programmer for many years. And one thing I did when I programmed, I wanted people to get access to I was creating, whether it was a website or a software. I wanted to make sure people had access to it. So I remember creating my first website when I created my business Tech Access years ago. And it was really cool looking, very snazzy, very polished. And I, gentleman that was blind tell me that it was totally inaccessible to him. This was in 2000, but I was like, what do you mean it's totally inaccessible? It's up all the time, 24/7. He said, never. Because you just don't know what you don't know. And so that was my first experience. At the time, he said, all that my website could do was it did say my company name, and that was it. Screen reader couldn't get any access to anything else. So it's exciting how far we've come, but as we know, we still have a long way to go as well. So let me pass it over to Antonio. He has a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Deborah. So no, let's say if you go back when you started Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and if you look to the type of questions that people and the type of topics that were generating interest in those days, and if we transpose that to 2017, so what do you think? What type of progress we're able to observe, and what type of new questions do you see being raised in 2017?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think, it started to go to mobile right when we started. And one thing that happened a lot is Apple's accessibility seems to be quite good. So there's definitely a lot more attention paid. I still think that the average developer is completely unaware, but the frameworks have put in a little bit of work. But honestly, I think we still have a long way to go. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
And do you see that when that developers are getting enough support from the different toolkits that companies are creating? Let's say, especially the main ones, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, or Twitter. Is that enough content for them to work with?
It's a good question. The funny thing is that I'm not a programmer anymore. Like I kind of stopped right when we started Gad and started my company. So now most of the day I'm going around doing biz dev. So I don't even dig into code. I almost haven't touched code in years. So I couldn't tell you in a lot of detail. I do know that Apple's has gotten very good, and they're kind of forcing folks to pay attention to accessibility. That part is great, but I'm not sure. I never was much of a Microsoft guy, at least not since I think the year 2000, 2005. I'm not too sure about the other frameworks.
Okay, I think that all of them are making strides. So we see what's happened since the change at the top in Microsoft. You've got a change from Steve Ballmer to Satya Nadella, and it's like night and day. Not just in accessibility, but the whole way that the company operates. But accessibility is part of it, and you can definitely see the increased focus, and there's new accessibility features coming out on a regular basis. So we've got guys from Microsoft talking at 2 of our events for Atos, one in London, one in Paris, and they'll be showing some interesting stuff. And they're doing things like translation on the fly, so you can get live captions and so on. So that's great for meetings if you've got people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And I know that even the open source community are delivering on accessibility. So if you if you install Linux, there's screen readers built into to the OS, and we've got Orange, the telecommunications company, coming along. They've started an open source accessibility initiative. So again, they'll be speaking about what they're doing. So I think the whole industry is alive to the idea. We, like you say, have a very long way to go, because we're certainly not reached the point where everything's accessible. And certainly, as you see the sort of development curve, new technology, accessibility is lagging behind that curve often, because people don't necessarily think of it from the beginning. But I'm encouraged, because I've been working in the field for a long time, and I do see more people more companies paying attention to it earlier. I know Deborah's got another comment as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
We,
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There seems to be a lot of improvement, and every year, chills go down my spine as I see all these different folks that are getting into it, including the bank that initially got me to write the blog post. I never mentioned their name publicly, but in the third year, they contacted us, not knowing that they had anything to do with this, saying that they were creating an event internally and they cared about accessibility. Last year I spoke at Chase, and I thought I was just showing up to an event, and it was just in a little conference room, but it was like a co-keynote with the CEO of Chase Card Services, and I didn't expect it to come from top down. So I was very happy to see that. But at the same time, I personally don't feel good about letting go of the gas pedal, because you're familiar, I assume, with the blind onion?
Yes.
Yeah, about a year or two ago, there was a tweet, and it kind of hurt, but it makes a good point, which is now that GAD is over, let's look forward to the next 364 days of like global accessibility oblivion or something like that. And so, it was funny, but it also like made the point. We do have a lot to do, and I kind of take it as motivation. And every year I always feel like I should have done so much more. And hopefully we can do more. And another thing that I think is super interesting that's coming down the pike is AR, augmented reality, and some of the new technologies are pretty interesting. Though I think there might be a bit of controversy with some of it. But I saw this really great TED Talk where they took this vest that you put on, and they hook it up to the audio of the iPhone and turn it into a haptic touch. And this allows other forms of communication so that you can actually hear what people are saying through the vest. I've mentioned it to a few people who were not that excited about it, and I get that there is a little bit of controversy there, but technology moves on, and I think that the folks that are paying attention to accessibility and augmented reality together are going to create the best product, and it's going to change the game, and hopefully that will mean good things for accessibility. I believe it will.
And technology a lot of times is controversial, especially new technology. So we talk about new technologies on the show all the time. And one thing that I've seen, and Neil already, well, both of you talked about it, but the corporations, they want for things to be accessible for their employees and customers. I mean, that's just logical. They don't always understand how to do it. And here in the States, we certainly are, the lawsuits are way up on accessibility, web accessibility, but it also is, we're getting lawsuits over mobile or threats of lawsuits over mobile apps not being accessible, and a lot of employment. There's a lot of around employers not employing people with disabilities. And I travel a lot globally, and I'm asked often, why do we do this in the United States? And it's like, I don't know, but this is just what we do in the US. And so I agree, there's a lot of work to be done. And everything is moving so fast. All these new technologies, the AI, the wearables, the IoTs, the one that you mentioned, they're exciting, but at the same time, we don't want to be left out, because this is not just about individuals with disabilities. It's also about people that are aging in place, and and about people that don't speak the same language. So we talk about a lot of the innovation, but I think that there's still a real opportunity for the universities, the technical colleges, to get more involved, to make sure that the developers do know about this, and they do know how, that we're not asking them to dumb it down, that we're asking them to really just make sure you're not leaving 20%, maybe more, maybe less, depending upon how you're calculating it, of your users out. And you want to make sure that I was in the banking industry before companies, and we were really actively trying to get the customers to go to the technology that we had created online, or at the time there weren't mobile phone, we weren't building apps, but when I was in that field, but we built technology so the customers would use it. Customers can't use it, like your dad, then that's a failure. That's a failure that we, at the time as a bank, needed to address to make sure our customers could use the technology we were building for them. So we know this is, and I know that Neil might want to jump in here, but we know this is bigger than just web accessibility, but work to do, but we're moving forward, and I think you and Jennison should be very proud that you started this conversation, and you really honor your dad doing this too, Joe, which I commend as well. So Neil, Joe, I don't know if you want to make a comment, and then I'll pass it over to Neil.
I actually do. When you were mentioning Jennison earlier, I meant to add that he is really unbelievable.
Talent. Talent.
And you said brilliant, and you're really right, because he's very conscious about how he's putting it all together, and it just, it's unbelievable. As you see, I'm speechless, but he's really a force of nature.
He really is, and I will tell. I don't know if he wants me to tell this, but when I first met him years and years ago, I was talking to him, and we were at an accessibility conference. And here's this very talented young man who happens to be blind, and he said, "Deborah, I didn't want to go to disability or disability inclusion. I wanted to be a technologist, or I forget now what specifically he was saying he wanted to do, but he said, but the industry just took me there. And the more I saw the opportunities, the more I wanted to be part of the solution. And I always will, I really admire his out-of-the-box thinking, his leadership, his desire to make a difference. I think that's why a lot of us are in this accessibility field. We want to make the world a better place and embrace technology. But there's still, like you said, like we're all saying, there's still a lot of work to do, and it certainly is a lot bigger even than the web. The web's a great place to start, all the apps and the mobile and all the stuff that we need to do, but we can't slow down and say, okay, we're done now, so lots of work to do, but I applaud both of your leaderships. Go ahead, Neil.
Definitely. I think it was a point that you made about going to the bank and being surprised that the CEO was there. This is something that we've been working on for a long time, and I'm a firm believer in that if you really want it to take hold, it can't just sit with the development team. It's got to be something that you're embedding into your organizational DNA. And we've got our CEOs for a number of our countries coming along, opening the events and so on, which is great. We're encouraging other senior leaders within our customer base and our partners to come along as well, because actually we're running two tracks for a number of our events. We're running a technical track and then a sort of policy and more fuzzy, fluffy, but really important track, which is about the sort of why you're doing this, what it means for your customers, the sort of organizational maturity kind of stuff. So we've got some really interesting angles, which are not traditional web accessibility, but sort of organizational accessibility. And we've got Barclays Bank coming along, and they're members of the Business Disability Forum, and they've done this amazing thing, which is create what is known as the maturity model for accessibility. And that looks at holistically at an organization. So if you're in IT, you'll understand sort of IT security maturity models. Well, this is one for accessibility, and it takes everything from executive buy-in to how you deal with legacy apps and policies and everything else. And so we're trying to take as wider holistic view as possible, while still engaging the development community. And on top of that, also slaying a few zombies. Because we've got a young lady we're collaborating with at the BBC, and we'll be showing off some unconscious bias training that we're developing with them. which is accessible, but it's also based upon the zombie apocalypse. So
really,
yeah. So I think we're trying to make accessibility fun, and I think Gad makes it fun because it brings people together, and I think sometimes we, taking your point about the blind onion, it can be a bit of a lonely furrow that you plow, and I think it's less so now. And one of the reasons that we started AXSChat was because we wanted to bring people together. So and we built a bit of a community around it. So people come back week after week and contribute, and it's something that we'll continue doing because it's a labor of love, but also what we want to do is highlight all of the good stuff, and really not focus on the negativity. I think Gad is a very positive day. It's not a day for moaning. It's a day for celebrating the work that people are doing. So I also, like Deborah, want to thank you for that, because it really has been a great experience so far. I'm looking forward to what we do next week. And yes, and Antonio has got a very valid point about stuff in other languages. Do you want to raise that, Antonio?
Yes, because when we were looking into topics that were being shared across social media, basically you were able to see a lot of info in English related with something happening in the UK, in the United States, in Canada. But then there's a lot of interesting things happening in South America, in Spain, in Africa, in Asia, all over the world, and somehow you were not able to see that. It's somehow being, because people were expressing themselves in their own native languages, and they're not. And then, but we tried to find a way. Let's try to connect with them to AXSChat, try to bring them to talk with us, and somehow support them in the efforts that they are doing. As an example, a project in Spain called Nos Why Not, where they have photographers with learning disabilities who created a database of photography that can be used by the media. So, and a group in Dusseldorf, where they also have people with learning disabilities, helping to do some software testing and helping the local community where they are in to upskill themselves into digital. So we're always looking for that type of projects and bring them to life, because we know that sometimes people are not that comfortable with modern ways of communicating, and especially in social media, and we end up not knowing about those great projects that are out there.
Yeah, we've done a few translations on the website so that folks can read what's going on in other languages. Don't remember how many we have right now, but we definitely we'll keep building that up. But I think that's great work.
I seem to remember, as part of our email conversation in the lead up to this interview, you said you were pleased to see that there was some stuff going on in French, because it turns out that you're both from both you and Jennison are from Montreal.
That's right, by total coincidence. It's pretty funny.
So yeah, we were puzzling over to how to translate Gad into French, and it doesn't trip off the tongue quite so well. But it's better than the German, which was sort of Barrierefreiheitstag.
That's funny. Well, have you ever read the Asterix comic book?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes.
They do unbelievable translations. I don't know how they're able to get these great names. They don't make it 100% pure, but they translate from language to language and always have these great names.
Yeah. No, they do a fantastic job. What's it? Getafix, the druid. I remember.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think we're probably roughly at the end of our half hour. Thank you for your patience in enduring the technological trials of getting online. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Joe, and I thank you once again, and thank you for Gad, because it's a great thing.
It is. It is. Thank you for your leadership, Joe.
Well, I'd like to thank the community because GAD is the community. I mean, if the community didn't pick it up, it would have been nothing, and that's really a key element, and that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. And I try and tell folks is that if you have a vision and you attach it to community, you can achieve anything.
Well said. Well said.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, and see you tomorrow on Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah.